Palestinians have a right to a separate state?
No, I don't think they do, but...
In 2007, the head of military intelligence for the Israeli army had a meeting with the US ambassador in Tel Aviv. We're looking at the classified cable that summarizes what was talked about in this meeting. The topic of discussion was Iran, Syria, the Gaza Strip, and Hamas. Hamas had just won the Palestinian elections, which kicked off a fight with the other Palestinian group, which ended in Hamas taking over Gaza completely. They controlled it. And if you're an Israeli citizen or the US government, this is a terrible set of events. Hamas is a violent extremist group known to commit heinous violence against civilians in Israel, and they were now in power. They controlled the Gaza Strip an hour away from Tel Aviv. But look at this leaked document. In this leaked cable, you see that the Israeli official says that Israel would be happy if Hamas took over Gaza, because it would mean that Israel could now treat Gaza like a hostile country.
3 days post the ceasefire and there's unrelenting bombing in Gaza.
This document is a view into a strategy that right-wing factions within the Israeli government have used for decades in an effort to win one of the most divisive conflicts in the world today, in which two groups are fighting over one piece of holy land, and one side is winning by using a very specific tactic, one that the world says is illegal and immoral, and one that worked for a short time, but that recently has been shown to be a recipe for even worse violence and conflict and suffering. In this video, I want to lay out what this strategy looks like and show you how it failed. I know this is a topic that is full of deep emotions, that has real stakes in people's lives. Please know that I am earnest in my effort to tell this story with clarity and with accuracy. And also, please note that this is not a full account of the conflict between Israel and its neighbors. But I do hope that it sheds light on a view of the conflict that sometimes gets lost in all of the yelling.
Johnny， 早知道我大以色列那一步，就先学你这么温柔、这么诚恳、这么委婉的表达就好了。
各位朋友，今天呢非常感谢观众连续2次票选第2名，让我能够有机会把我最想要分享的 Johnny Harris 这部纪录片呢呈现给在荧幕前的各位观众。因为之前我做以哈战争的冲突打到现在，都只是为了大以色列，很多人对我的内容不太认同。以色列自从1948年复国以来，到1967年的6日战争，包含奥斯陆协议等等，我虽然都做了完整的陈述，但是很多人他没有办法从我的这部影片当中看清楚纳坦雅胡这位以色列极右派的领导人他自己个人的心理动机以及他的信念是什么，所以并不了解纳坦雅胡是如何的一步步违反奥斯陆协议，甚至让以色列现在面临前所未有的危机。今天特别让 Johnny Harris 的独立调查以及深入分析的能力呢，带我们更深入的一窥为什么实质上纳坦雅胡彻头彻尾就是一个最支持哈马斯的政权，以至于导致了2023年10月7号以哈冲突的爆发，将以色列陷入了一场危机当中。我们今天就是要来有一个更清楚的脉络，重新从以色列在巴勒斯坦这块地区复国之后，以色列与巴勒斯坦人的恩恩怨怨是怎么样的导致于今天纳坦雅胡政府自己要为这一场以哈冲突的爆发背责任。你可能会觉得这样讲是一种危言耸听，但是相信你在看完之后一定会重新对于这起事件的前世今生有更深入的客观理解。就让我们一起来看吧 ，Let's go！
For 2,000 years, Jewish people around the world have been persecuted and segregated and ostracized from society. That is a fact. By the time the 1800s came around, it became clear that wherever the Jews went, persecution would follow. This is when a movement emerged, calling for Jews to come together and to create a country for themselves, where they could govern themselves and be free from all of this racist hatred. The creation of a Jewish country would have at the top of its priority list the security of the Jewish people. But the big question was where? Several places floated around in proposals: Argentina, even modern-day Kenya, which back then was Uganda. But most people in this movement wanted the Jews to return to their historic homeland, a place called Palestine, where Jews built their temple and their culture 3,000 years ago, but then were exiled. And now there was this call to return, so that Jews could feel safe after 18 centuries of Jewish suffering. So as the 1900s came around, tens of thousands of Jews, mostly from Europe, flocked to Palestine, which eventually came under control of the British. The British were getting ready to leave this region and were struggling to contain the growing conflict between native Arabs and all these Jewish immigrants. Then in the 1940s came a horrific genocide against the Jewish people in Europe, led out by Hitler and his Nazi regime. This created a wave of international support for this idea of giving the Jewish people a homeland where they could be safe. Before they left, the British asked the UN to determine what would replace them in Palestine. And the UN decided that Palestine would become two new countries, one for the Jews and one for the Palestinian Arabs that had already been living in this region.
The Jewish state colored light, the Arab state dark, Jaffa to go to the Arabs, Jerusalem internationalized.
But as happens when outsiders draw lines on old land, there was a problem here. Within these borders that were meant for the new Jewish country, hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs were living, who would soon have to leave their homes to move to their side of the line.
这里我稍做一个补充，英国呢，它在一战后就取得了巴勒斯坦的这个托管权啊。但是像Johnny讲的，其实英国也想要放弃这个托管。那么英国呢，在纳粹也确实同情以色列人哈，所以呢支持两国方案，以色列跟巴勒斯坦人各自有一个独立的国家。所以双方一开始的时候都认为英国是站在他们那一边。好，可是呢，英国没有办法满足双方的期待。在1947年的时候，英国就把巴勒斯坦这个问题交给联合国来处理，好，自己选择退出。而是让联合国来提出两国方案 UN 第181号的决议文哈。但是有一个重点我必须很客观讲，就是那个时候阿拉伯国家其实是拒绝接受犹太人建国的，因为第一个他们认为说这个会变成是殖民式的强加。以色列如果有一个国家的话呢，那么一定会有某些的巴勒斯坦人呢会变成活在以色列的殖民底下的。好，但是以色列人最早是接受这个分治方案，就因此单方面的在1948年的时候就宣布建国。好，那这也导致周边的阿拉伯国家就联合起来对以色列宣战，这是第一次以阿战争的爆发。而在这个战争过程当中呢，因为英国已经还给联合国来决定，所以英国就没有明确支持任何一边，反而成为两边呢批评的对象。巴勒斯坦人认为英国出卖了他们，而犹太人则认为呢英国还阻碍了他们建国。好，但我必须说其实在当时历史的时空背景来讲，就如同 Johnny Harris 跟我的态度都是一样，支持以色列建国的。先抛开掉这个建国是不是上帝的计划呢，我们先不论，但是至少必须承认，巴勒斯坦那个时候因为已经有太多欧洲的犹太人有进来住，这么大的一个民族，如果你不让他们有一个独立的国家的话呢，对于长期中东发展来讲，一定会爆发很大的冲突。同样的，巴勒斯坦人难道不应该建国吗？所以我认为这是将心比心，我是支持以色列，但是我也仍然支持巴勒斯坦人有自己的国家。
Okay, wait, I'm going to pause there because, as I said, this is not a full history of the Arab-Israeli conflict. We actually just made a video on our new channel, Search Party, which focuses on what happens next, the conflict between Israel and its Arab neighbors. You can go watch that, links in the description. It'll give you some useful context. For now, just note that this led to a horrific conflict. Jewish militias forced over 700,000 Arabs out of their homes, turning them into refugees. The proposed borders shifted around, turned into ceasefire lines, and after all was said and done, the Jewish people did indeed get their own country, the State of Israel. And the two important points here are that, number one, the very foundation of the Israeli country is for security of the Jewish people after nearly 2,000 years of persecution. And number two, the location they chose to set it up was becoming, as a result of this conflict, not much safer than Europe. That's a tension that follows this whole story. Okay, so now let's fast forward to 1967. Israel has its country, and they fight a short war with their Arab neighbors, and they win that war, and they take over all of this land. It's a huge victory for them. I'm going to take away the Sinai Peninsula from here because they did give that back to Egypt as part of a peace deal a few years later. Israel now controls important pieces of land that enlarge their Jewish country. Many saw this victory as a sign from God that they were actually entitled to be here. But once again, Palestinians, nearly 1 million of whom had been kicked out of their homes, were living here in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, which Israel now controlled, but they weren't really sure what to do with it. And it's this territory that would become the stage for the strategy that is the topic of this video, where over time, this land would be sliced up with roads and checkpoints, walls and other military infrastructure that would control the movement and lives of the Palestinians. Soon, even Israeli citizens would start to move out here in large numbers, building full-on towns and further dividing up this territory. Moving citizens into occupied territory like this is something that the world has deemed illegal and immoral. So this occupation starts in 1967, and it goes on for decades, till eventually, the Palestinians living here can't handle it anymore, and they start fighting back. This is known as the first uprising, or intifada. It started with boycotts, but escalated into mass protests, where Palestinians of all ages would throw stones and sometimes Molotov cocktails at much better equipped Israeli soldiers. It was Palestinian rage exploding against Israeli occupation, and it went on for years. The Israeli government would respond by cracking down, killing many Palestinians. Another important thing that happens around the same time, down in the occupied Gaza Strip, is that a new movement forms, promising to fight back against this occupation, calling for the destruction of Israel. The group is called Hamas. The first intifada showed that this wasn't going to work. Chopping up Palestinian land, oppressing them, keeping them in this occupation was only going to produce more violence. It wasn't going to fulfill Israel's promise to provide security and safety for the Jewish people. They had to switch course.
The security of the Israeli people will be reconciled with the hopes of the Palestinian people, and there will be more security and more hope for all.
So in the 1990s, they start getting serious about peace talks with the Palestinians, and they come to this agreement called the Oslo Accords, which for the first time establishes a Palestinian government authority and giving it power to govern pockets of land in the West Bank. It also gave the Palestinians some authority over almost all of the Gaza Strip, though there were still settlements in all of these places. This was a big deal for this conflict. Like, both sides were talking to each other and coming to agreements that was giving authority to the Palestinians. But another theme of this story is that hardliners can use violence to derail peace. And that's exactly what happened here. Right-wing Israelis start holding rallies, calling their prime minister a traitor and a Nazi for giving land to the Palestinians. Some of these rallies are led by a now familiar character, Benjamin Netanyahu.
The people of Israel want a real peace, and real peace means peace with security, peace they can trust, with a partner they can trust, and they don't feel they have it here. We want a real peace, not a fake one.
But the peace talks continue.
With all our neighbors, a comprehensive peace.
And shortly after signing the second part of this deal to give Palestinians some land, the Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin is assassinated by a far-right Israeli. Hamas conducts bus bombings, and the next year, Benjamin Netanyahu is elected as the Prime Minister of Israel.
是的，你没听错哈，以色列的总理拉宾都可以被自己以色列的极右派激进分子给刺杀身亡。其实以色列从来就不是一般西方社会的民主国家，在中东这片土地上，以色列跟阿拉伯世界长期的仇恨，以及各自从小就教育自己的儿童要消灭对方。你以为只有在阿拉伯的穆斯林的恐怖主义分子里头才会这样教导孩童吗？不，如果真的了解以色列的，就会知道，随便去问任何一个以色列的年轻人，甚至是孩子，他们都会告诉你说，他们从小就是要被教育，要消灭所有巴勒斯坦人，这个是事实。那么回过来讲，拉宾被刺杀之后，纳坦雅胡就顺利当选，这个是不是一个巧合呢？还有为什么 可以这么巧合的拉宾被刺杀之后，就出现哈马斯的公车爆炸案呢？
Netanyahu is a key figure in this story because his worldview embodies a way of thinking that has taken root in Israel in recent years. The idea that the only way to give true security to the Jewish people is by doing whatever is necessary to stop the Palestinians from having a state anywhere in these borders.
Look, I'm 28 years old. I've had to defend my country in 2 wars and in many battles. Nobody wants peace more than Israel. But the stumbling block to the road for peace is this demand for a PLO state, which will mean more war, which will mean more violence in the Middle East. And I sincerely believe, if this demand is abandoned, we can have real and genuine peace.
So that was Netanyahu when he was a 28-year-old. But when he becomes the prime minister a couple decades later, he spends his term sabotaging the peace accords that his predecessor had worked so hard to create, claiming that the occupation of all this land and its people wasn't actually conquest, but rather the key for security of the Jewish people. They had to do this. Security was the one and only justification for all of this. So under his watch, settlers continue to move into the West Bank. We found this leaked video of Benjamin Netanyahu talking to some settlers in the West Bank. The cameraman does turn off the camera for a moment, but then turns it back on moments later. He is admitting to sabotaging the peace accords that the Israeli government had signed with the Palestinians. That because he disagreed with them, he wanted to sabotage them because he was so against a Palestinian state or any form of Palestinian autonomy in this land. And then he goes on to explain what his real thinking is on the situation. Netanyahu is a fantastic politician and statesman, and he's able to sort of cover up a lot of these policies in the name of security. But here we see what he really thinks as he's talking to these settlers, thinking he's not being recorded. So, unsurprisingly, the appetite for peace breaks down on both sides. Palestinians come to the conclusion that the Israelis aren't really serious about giving them any kind of autonomy in the West Bank or Gaza, that their situation will never change. And once again, they rise up in a second intifada, this one much more violent, much more coordinated. Hamas becomes a major player in the violence, with suicide bombings and attacks. Israel responds with great force, and during the fighting, 1,000 Israelis and 3,000 Palestinians are killed. At this point, the Netanyahu way of seeing the world is starting to look a lot better. Peace talks didn't work. All they did was produce more violence. And so maybe the only way to ensure security is to go back to full-blown occupation of controlling every move of the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So at this point, the occupation gets more and more suffocating. More walls, more barriers, more checkpoints, more settlements. Then in 2005, Israel withdraws from the Gaza Strip, letting the Palestinian Authority have total control there. They turn their attention entirely to their historic homeland of Judea and Samaria, which is the West Bank. The next year, an election is held in the Palestinian authorities, and the winner surprised the world and would create a new chapter for this conflict. The winner of these elections was Hamas.
This is a very, very bad result for the Palestinians and for Israel.
The incumbent Palestinian party that had lost the election tried to forcibly hold on to power, and soon the two Palestinian parties were fighting with each other. And it results in this split between the two Palestinian governments. It turns into violence. And when the dust settles, there's suddenly a bitter divide between these two Palestinian groups, Hamas completely taking over the Gaza Strip. And this gets us back to our leaked document that we started this video with, where an Israeli official is saying that they would actually be happy if Hamas took over the Gaza Strip, because now they can treat Gaza like a hostile country. Now that they're not occupying it, they're not responsible for the 2 million civilians who are living there. They can impose a blockade to control anything coming in and out of the Gaza Strip. People, food, medicine, money, building supplies. But there was another reason why Israel was happy that Hamas now controlled the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian government was now deeply divided, Hamas ruling Gaza and the West Bank being run by a more moderate, secular Palestinian faction. And crucially, neither considered the other to be legitimate, which weakened their ability to negotiate for any kind of state, for any kind of country, especially when Hamas still refused to recognize Israel's right to even exist. This division played right into the hands of the Israeli right. And this gets us back to Benjamin Netanyahu, that enemy of the earlier peace talks. He gets elected once again in 2009, declaring himself Mr. Security and promising to provide safety to Israeli citizens who are still shaken from the Second Intifada and are now worried that Hamas now controls the entirety of the Gaza Strip. Netanyahu's playbook was already made clear. He had said it point blank. It's what he had been doing for years, sabotaging peace talks that would give Palestinians any kind of authority over this land and continuing to build settlements, while continuing, in his words in that leaked tape, to hit the Palestinians hard, to make it unbearable for them, a complete assault on the Palestinian government, dividing and slowly conquering the Palestinian people, making life hard and desperate for them, controlling their lives, watching their every move. And this is where we get to this paradoxical alignment, almost alliance, between Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas, the enemy of Israel. As long as Hamas held control over the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian cause would remain weak and divided. Netanyahu would feel justified in imposing this crippling blockade of the Gaza Strip, which in turn gave Hamas legitimacy among the people of the Gaza Strip, showing that their armed struggle against Israeli oppression was justified, provoking them to launch rockets into Israel to show that they were actually doing something, unlike the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, which in turn bolstered Netanyahu's narrative that the Palestinians actually don't want peace, they want violence and the destruction of Israel. And the only way for security is more occupation, more oppression. So instead of try to take Hamas out, Netanyahu overtly supported them by approving huge transfers of untraceable cash, literally delivered in suitcases into the Gaza Strip, cash that would inevitably end up in the hands of Hamas to be used against Israel. He legitimized Hamas by negotiating with them, releasing 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for 1 Israeli.
The Israeli soldier held captive by Palestinian militants for 5 years is expected to be freed within days.
The more Netanyahu could keep Hamas in power in Gaza, but keep them contained, the more he could ensure that Palestinians remained divided. He could keep peace talks from ever happening, which in turn gave him time to continue to pursue his expansionist project in the West Bank. And indeed, since 2009, when Netanyahu became the prime minister, the number of settlements in the West Bank has only gone up. And if you look at this map, you can see how these settlements just weave through and carve up this land, making it impossible to even fathom what a Palestinian state could look like, which is precisely the point of the strategy. I actually reported out here visiting the settlements back when I was at Vox. I did a series talking to the settlers, trying to understand why they live out there, what it's like to live in these settlements that are strangely peaceful and banal and just mundane. People living their lives because they're protected by the army. If you want a deeper dive on settlements, you can go watch that series. But if you're Netanyahu over the last 16 years, you think your plan is working. Like, you see all these settlements going up. The international community can't do anything about it. They keep supporting you. Every once in a while, there's some flare-up in the West Bank where Palestinians get into a fight with Israeli soldiers, but it gets contained. Every few years, Hamas fires some rockets, which then gives Israel the excuse to go, as they put it, cut the grass by conducting a short, swift, violent military campaign to keep Hamas at bay. And every day that goes by, the notion of a Palestinian state becomes less and less feasible. This is one reason why a far-right Israeli lawmaker called Hamas an asset. So divide and conquer has been the name of the game in Israel for a long time, but especially in the last 16 years under Netanyahu. And again, to the people in charge, they think it's working. Maybe this violent status quo, this equilibrium can hold, and the far right can get exactly what they want. Security for the Jewish people and expansion into all of this land. And maybe the occupation will break the Palestinian spirit, and they would give up on their dream of having a state. But that's not what happened. On October 7th, 2023, we saw how wrong-headed this theory of security was.
In an unprecedented surprise attack, the militant Hamas rulers of Gaza sent dozens of fighters into Israel by land, sea, and air.
This deadly attack launched by Hamas showed us that while Netanyahu's strategy of divide and conquer might be good for taking over more land, what it's not good for is making good on the original promise of Israel, which is ensuring the security of the Jewish people. In fact, his strategy has produced exactly the opposite. Now, the responsibility for what happened on October 7th lies with the people who committed those acts of terror, Hamas fighters and their leaders. There is no excuse or justification for their actions. But the point I'm trying to make with this video is that there's also others that need to stand accountable here. Those who used Hamas as a pawn to continue this divide and conquer policy, who are now engaged in a campaign of mass bloodshed on civilians. They deserve to stand accountable as well, to the Israeli people and to the countries that support Israel. I believe in the need for a Jewish state. I do. I think that's a very reasonable proposal, that Jewish people should feel safe somewhere in this world. And yet, what we're looking at isn't it. The Israeli project, the way that it's been wielded, in its current form, produces the exact opposite of security for the Jewish people.
我个人虽然是一个坚定的保守主义者呢，但是在 YouTube 平台上，我欣赏 Johnny Harris， 他并不是一个右派或左派的分子，只是一个独立制片人，完全靠自己深入的调查跟研究去挖掘背后的真相。因为他的影片，我们过去是不是也谈到了美国深层政府的结构？对照后来卫生部长小劳勃甘乃迪的论述，跟 Johnny Harris 的发现完全是一样的。另外 ，Johnny 也曾经揭露过，为什么过去在民主党执政的州跟共和党执政的州里头，反而是共和党发展的相对更好。有的人认为 Johnny 他是一个中间偏左的自由派分子，我个人认为 Johnny 并没有明显的左右之分，他更多的是客观的独立性。看完今天这一集，你一定要好好的重新去思考，你在支持的到底是以色列还是纳坦雅胡政府？如果你看懂以色列过去从复国以来这段历史的发展，就会知道为什么1993年以色列总理拉宾要跟巴勒斯坦达成奥斯陆和平协议，因为总理拉宾充分的意识到，我们不可能去赶走所有的巴勒斯坦人，让他们不在加萨走廊或者是约旦河西岸生活，因为这个已经是他们最后2块剩余非常小范围的面积了。那有人会问我说，为什么以色列他不干脆就整个统治加萨走廊跟约旦河西岸？我要告诉大家，当初奥斯陆协议的签订，很大的部分是因为以色列自己认为巴勒斯坦人跟以色列人口来讲，几乎等于是1:1。如果要统治一个跟你数量一样多的民族，那么以后以色列它在政治权力、投票等等各方面，以色列的统治权很有可能会被颠覆，落到巴勒斯坦人手中。犹太人始终都认为要以犹太人的安全为第一优先，所以那个时候其实他们认为最好的比例是8:2比，这也就是为什么我们看到现在的以色列境内有20%是巴勒斯坦人，是这样子的原因。所以奥斯陆协议本质上，它是帮以色列既可以与巴勒斯坦人和平相处，又可以不用面对去容纳要去吸收这么多巴勒斯坦人，造成统治管理上面未来的风险以及麻烦。因此，承认巴勒斯坦自治政府，达成和平协议，对以色列在拉宾那个时期来讲，其实是一个非常好的和平路线。而这个和平路线，随着次年，也就是1994年拉宾被暗杀之后，极右派的纳坦雅胡当选了。以色列在他长期的执政掌权之下，就让以色列人处于一个认为，若是不消灭巴勒斯坦人，就无法得到永久的和平这样子的一个思想。而这样子的思想框架背后的本质是恐怖的，是残忍的，就是你除非杀光所有的巴勒斯坦人嘛。
Hi.
Emma, shut up. You are Palestinian?
Yeah, I'm Palestinian.
Yeah, you go to hell.
Are you from Israel?
Yeah, of course.
You don't like me because I'm Palestinian?
Yeah.
Should I die because I'm Palestinian?
And kids, Palestinian children.
What? Do you want me to die because I'm Palestinian?
Yeah.
Do you want all Palestinian children to die? Kids. You want babies, Palestinian babies. You want them to die? I literally didn't even say a word. What just happened? Hello?
You like Palestine? Israel!
What is wrong with you?
I'm gonna marry you!
Free Palestine!
What the?
那我们假设只有杀光灭尽才是唯一的解决之道的话，那以色列不就活成当年纳粹希特勒所期望种族灭绝的目标吗？不就是因为这样的恐怖思想，才使得大家同情犹太人吗？借着 Johnny Harris 这部影片，讲一个我认为最简单、最实际的答案，那就是你只有跟巴勒斯坦人进行和平相处，给予他们平等的建国机会，以及把他们人民的统治权交还给他们的政府。唯有公平做到这一点，不再长期封锁加萨走廊，不再侵蚀约旦河西岸，把这么一丁点的领土还给他们总计目前约有700多万的巴勒斯坦人，让他们回去这些相对小的地方生存。我认为以色列的和平才会真正的来到，这个才是最安全。不然的话，只会出现2种选择。第一个情况就是，随着纳坦雅胡对加萨走廊把170万人全部赶到加萨走廊南部拉法这个小城市当中，净空了加萨的整个北部跟中部，死了6万的加萨平民，以后还会死多少，我们没人知道，对吧？但是呢，现在纳坦雅胡的做法，加深了巴勒斯坦人对以色列更深的仇恨。我认为会有很大的风险是，未来阿拉伯世界，好比说像黎巴嫩、叙利亚或者是也门的胡塞武装组织呢，会采取更大的报复性的打击，因为巴勒斯坦毕竟它是属于阿拉伯人的一个分支。那么第一个，也就是以色列未来要面对更深的报复打击，这个风险已经大大的提高。以色列目前的行为没有办法让阿拉伯人对纳坦雅胡政府有和平的信心，这是其一。第二点就是，就算阿拉伯世界不愿意实施报复，跟以色列进行正面冲突，而宁可放任以色列继续对加沙走廊加沙统治跟军事占领的话，以色列也已经成功的激起全世界，包含联合国150多个国家的全面谴责。换句话说，纳坦雅胡政府正在把以色列人成为了全世界最大的公敌，不再有人会同情以色列是过去那个2战之下被纳粹所逼迫的民族，在更多国家眼里，他们更像是一个新的纳粹者。纳坦雅胡政府不断的在加深这样子的观感，凡是只要对以色列提出批评或指责，纳坦雅胡就称其为是反犹主义分子，把仇恨歧视性的标签贴在别人身上，我认为是把以色列带向最大的危险之地。纳坦雅胡其实是在给以色列人扣上一个反人类的帽子，这个我认为才是最可怕的。这也是为什么2024年10月有将近70万的以色列人走上街头抗议纳坦雅胡，要求其全面停战。因为有太多的以色列人在担心这种极右的思维以及作风，将以色列人拖向的是全世界最反人道主义、对加沙走廊反人道主义的一个国家。而今天将你所谈的，都是在充分的还原2023年10月7号的以哈战争前发生什么事情。但是如果你想知道纳坦雅胡是如何的下令前国防部部长约阿夫使用以色列最惨无人道的军事禁令汉尼拔指令，在10月7号当天无差别的攻击哈马斯的武装分子以及被挟持的平民，还有被俘虏的士兵的话，想要知道真相的你，并且要知道10月7号当天背后更有一场纳坦雅胡所精心设计好瞒骗全世界的阴谋，你就不能不看这部